Chosen one. The story begins at a moment when a quiet but undeniable truth rises to the surface of your awareness. For a long time, you carried the role of the one who held others together. When people were struggling, they came to you for guidance, comfort, and stability. When situations grew complicated, you were the one expected to understand, forgive, and remain patient. Your presence became a place where others deposited their fears, frustrations, and unfinished emotions. At first, you believed this role was simply part of being compassionate. You believed that loving others meant making room for their weaknesses, standing beside them when they faltered, and offering support even when it was not returned in equal measure. But as the years passed, something inside you began to feel heavier. The kindness you offered often came back to you as silence. The loyalty you extended was rarely matched with loyalty of the same depth. You noticed that many of the people who depended on you did not ask how you were carrying your own burdens. They accepted your strength as though it were an endless resource. What you once interpreted as patience and generosity slowly revealed another pattern. People had grown comfortable receiving from you without ever learning how to give. Chosen one. Heaven now opens your eyes to what was happening beneath the surface of those relationships. The exhaustion you felt was not simply the result of working too hard or caring too deeply. It came from repeatedly pouring your time, energy, and compassion into people who never intended to build the same support around you. What looked like friendship, loyalty, or partnership was often a one-sided exchange where your presence was valued only for what it could provide. This realization does not arrive to shame you for loving others. It arrives to free you from the misunderstanding that love must always mean sacrifice without boundaries. God reveals that your compassion was never meant to become an open doorway for endless access. The emotional heaviness you carried was not random. It was the weight of giving far more than those around you were willing to return. Chosen one, this moment marks the beginning of a divine turning point. The season where your kindness could be quietly exploited has reached its end. God is shifting your life into a new alignment where your energy will be protected, your presence will be honored, and your time will be invested in relationships that reflect the value placed within you. What once drained you will no longer define your path. The chapter ahead will show you what life looks like when the strength you carry is no longer used without recognition, but positioned where it can finally grow, multiply, and be respected. Chosen one, the first awakening in this season does not arrive through sudden confrontation, but through a slow and sometimes painful realization. For years, you believed you were simply helping people. When someone around you was struggling, you listened. When someone made mistakes, you forgave. When someone lacked stability, you stepped in with patience, encouragement, and support. You carried these actions as part of your identity because compassion had always been natural to you. You did not approach relationships calculating what you would gain in return. Instead, you believed that kindness was its own reward and that sincere care for others would eventually produce mutual respect and loyalty. Yet as God begins to open your eyes, a deeper pattern becomes visible. Many of the people who surrounded you were not approaching you with the same sincerity that guided your actions. While you believed you were simply supporting them during difficult moments, some of them were quietly studying you. They were observing how far your patience would extend before you resisted. They were watching how quickly you forgave after being hurt. They were measuring how much emotional labor you were willing to carry without demanding the same care in return. What appeared on the surface to be ordinary relationships often carried an unspoken calculation beneath them. Chosen one, this realization can be deeply unsettling because it challenges the way you once understood your role in those relationships. You believed your kindness was strengthening bonds with others. In reality, your kindness sometimes became a testing ground for people who lacked integrity. Each time you showed patience when someone disappointed you, it quietly answered a question in their mind. How much can I take before this person finally draws a line? When you offered forgiveness instead of confrontation, another silent measurement occurred. How much responsibility can I avoid while still keeping their support? This does not mean every person around you acted with such motives. Some individuals genuinely valued your presence and appreciated the support you gave them. But there were others who saw your compassion as something to be stretched rather than honored. Instead of recognizing the depth of what you offered, they treated it like an open resource they could continue drawing from without limits. Chosen one, the most painful part of this awakening is not merely the betrayal itself. It is the realization that some of those people were never confused about your value. They understood that your presence carried stability, wisdom, and emotional strength. They knew that your loyalty was rare, yet instead of responding with gratitude and responsibility, they hoped your generosity would remain available without accountability. They relied on your willingness to understand them, while making little effort to understand you. This dynamic often remained hidden because you approached those relationships with good intentions. You believed people were simply going through difficult seasons and needed extra patience. When someone failed to show appreciation, you assumed perhaps they were overwhelmed or unaware of how much you had invested in them. When someone repeated the same behavior that hurt you, you gave them another chance because you believed growth takes time. Chosen one, your willingness to extend grace was never wrong. Grace reflects the heart of God. Yet grace without discernment can become a doorway through which manipulation quietly enters. The people who tested your kindness were not always consciously planning to exploit you, but they gradually became comfortable receiving more than they gave. Each moment when you remained silent about your own needs reinforced the idea that your support would always be there. Over time, this created a pattern that left you carrying more emotional weight than anyone realized. You became the one people turned to for stability, while your own struggles remained largely unseen. Others felt safe bringing their problems to you because they knew you would listen without judgment. But very few of them paused to ask how you were carrying the responsibilities placed on your shoulders. Chosen one, God allowed this pattern to continue for a season, not because He wanted you to be mistreated, but because exposure often requires time. Some truths about people's intentions cannot be revealed through a single interaction. They appear only after repeated situations reveal the consistency of someone's behavior. Through those repeated experiences, God was allowing the difference between genuine need and manipulation to become visible. This exposure required patience because your heart was inclined toward mercy. You did not rush to label someone as manipulative simply because they made mistakes. Instead, you gave people room to grow and opportunities to show sincerity. That patience allowed the pattern to reveal itself clearly. When someone repeatedly took without giving, ignored your needs while expecting your support, or dismissed your boundaries once they appeared, their intentions became unmistakable. Chosen one, prayer played an important role in this awakening. During the moments when the emotional weight felt overwhelming, you brought your questions before God. You asked why certain relationships felt so draining and why your efforts seemed to produce so little reciprocity. Those quiet conversations with heaven became spaces where clarity began forming. God gently guided you to look at situations from a different perspective. Instead of asking only why people behaved the way they did, you began asking what those patterns were teaching you. Slowly, the answer emerged. The relationships that exhausted you were revealing the importance of discernment. They were teaching you to distinguish between someone who truly needed help and someone who simply wanted access to your strength. Chosen one, true need carries humility. When a person genuinely needs support, they recognize the value of what they receive. They may not always have the ability to repay kindness immediately, but they show gratitude and respect. Manipulation, on the other hand, often appears confident in its expectation. It assumes that support will continue, regardless of how little is returned. As this distinction became clearer, your understanding of your own role in relationships began changing. You realized that compassion does not require endless availability. Loving others does not mean allowing them unlimited access to your time, energy, and emotional strength. Boundaries are not the opposite of kindness. They protect the ability to continue loving without becoming depleted. Chosen one. The painful reflection that accompanied this awakening served a deeper purpose. It helped you reclaim responsibility for the stewardship of your own life. For a long time, you had allowed others to define how much of yourself you should give, often without considering whether the exchange was healthy or sustainable. Now, God was inviting you to participate in a new pattern, where your generosity would be guided by wisdom rather than obligation. This shift does not mean you become cold or indifferent to others' needs. Instead, it means you become more intentional about where your energy flows. You begin recognizing which relationships are built on mutual respect and which ones depend entirely on your willingness to carry the weight alone. Discernment allows you to invest your compassion where it can grow, rather than where it will simply be consumed. Chosen one. What you once saw as betrayal now reveals itself as part of your awakening. The exposure of these patterns was not meant to shame you for being kind. It was meant to show you how valuable your kindness truly is. When something precious is left unguarded, people who lack integrity may treat it casually. But when its value becomes recognized, it must be protected. Through prayer and reflection, you begin understanding that God never intended for your strength to be used endlessly without recognition. The compassion placed within your heart was meant to bring healing, not exhaustion. By allowing you to see the difference between sincere connection and silent calculation, God is preparing you for relationships that honor the same values you carry. Chosen one. This realization marks the beginning of a transformation. You are no longer the person who unknowingly allowed others to measure your kindness without consequence. You are becoming someone who recognizes both the beauty and the responsibility of the strength within you. And as this awareness grows, the way you move through relationships will begin changing in ways that protect your spirit, while still reflecting the compassion that defines who you are. Chosen one. As the awakening deepens, God begins revealing something even more specific about the patterns you experienced. The people who attached themselves to your life were not always acting randomly or without awareness. Over time, many of them learned exactly where your blind spots were. They discovered the places in your character where compassion was so strong that protection was often forgotten. Your empathy, your reluctance to disappoint others, and your instinct to explain yourself rather than defend yourself became the very openings through which others gained access to your time, your energy, and your emotional strength. You were someone who believed in understanding people's intentions rather than immediately judging their actions. When someone hurt you, your first response was often to search for the reason behind their behavior. Perhaps they were going through something difficult. Perhaps they did not realize the impact of their actions. Perhaps they needed patience rather than confrontation. This approach came from a sincere desire to treat others with grace. Yet certain people recognized that your empathy made it easier for them to avoid responsibility. Chosen one, they studied the rhythm of your mercy. They noticed how quickly you forgave when someone apologized, even if the apology carried little change behind it. They observed how often you gave second chances, believing that everyone deserved the opportunity to grow. They realized that if they expressed enough regret or emotional distress, the door they had once closed through their behavior could easily reopen. Guilt became one of the most common tools used against you. When you attempted to create distance or establish a boundary, some people responded by framing your protection as abandonment. They reminded you of the moments when you had helped them before, implying that withdrawing now meant you had stopped caring. Because your heart was sensitive to the pain of others, those accusations often pulled you back into situations you had already recognized as unhealthy. Over time, this pattern became familiar to those who benefited from it. They understood that if they approached you with vulnerability, even if it was temporary or strategic, your compassion would make it difficult for you to turn them away. Instead of respecting your kindness, they treated it as a resource they could return to whenever they needed relief from their own problems. Chosen one. What once felt like isolated disappointments now begins forming a clear pattern in your mind. You start recognizing that certain individuals did not simply make mistakes repeatedly. Their behavior often adjusted itself around your responses. When you forgave quickly, they returned quickly. When you explained yourself carefully, they listened just long enough to find another way back into your life. The pattern reveals something difficult but important. Some people were not merely flawed in the way all humans can be flawed. Many of them were strategic in how they interacted with your compassion. This realization can feel painful because it challenges the way you once interpreted those relationships. You believed your patience was helping people grow. In reality, it sometimes helped them maintain access to the stability you provided without confronting the deeper issues within themselves. They did not need to develop their own strength as long as they could lean on yours. Yet even here, God's wisdom was working quietly through the experience. Every blind spot that someone exploited became a lesson that strengthened your awareness. Each time your kindness was taken for granted, you learned more about the difference between empathy and overexposure. Each time someone manipulated your willingness to forgive, your discernment grew sharper. Gradually, you began understanding that compassion must be guided by wisdom in order to remain healthy. Chosen one, those lessons reshaped the way you approached relationships. Instead of explaining yourself endlessly, you began recognizing the importance of silence when someone refused to respect your boundaries. Instead of assuming every apology reflected sincere change, you learned to observe whether actions followed the words spoken. Instead of reopening doors automatically, you started asking whether the person knocking had done the work required to return. The places where others once found easy access gradually became protected spaces. Your empathy remained, but it was no longer unguarded. Your patience remained, but it was no longer infinite toward those who showed no intention of growth. The blind spots that once allowed manipulation slowly transformed into areas of strength where your awareness now stood watch. Chosen one, as this clarity continues unfolding, God reveals another layer of truth about the relationships you once carried. Many of the connections that seemed meaningful on the surface were never truly built on mutual love. They were built on extraction. People returned to your life not because they desired genuine relationship, but because they needed something you carried within your spirit. Some came when they needed emotional comfort. Others arrived when they needed wisdom during moments of crisis. Many appeared when their own strength had failed them, and they needed someone stable enough to carry their weight. In those moments, you became a reservoir for people who had not yet learned how to sustain themselves spiritually or emotionally. Chosen one. This role can feel honorable at first. Being someone others trust during difficult times reflects the strength of your character. Yet the pattern becomes unhealthy when those same people disappear the moment stability returns to their lives. Instead of building connection, they built dependence. They returned when they needed restoration, but rarely remained when you needed support in return. Over time, you became a place where spiritually bankrupt people came to refill themselves. They borrowed your peace, instead of seeking peace through their own relationship with God. They borrowed your clarity, instead of developing their own understanding. They borrowed your strength, while avoiding the work required to strengthen themselves. What you once called friendship often functioned more like a refuge for those unwilling to grow. They came to you for answers, guidance, and reassurance, yet they resisted the deeper changes those conversations invited. When their immediate problems were solved, they withdrew again until the next crisis appeared. Chosen one, God now helps you see that this pattern was never sustainable. Relationships built on extraction eventually drain the person who continues giving without receiving. Love requires mutuality. It requires a willingness from both sides to invest, grow, and support one another. Without that balance, what looks like connection eventually becomes exhaustion. The clarity you receive during this season reveals that some of the closeness you once believed in was actually one-sided survival. Others fed on the energy, stability, and encouragement you provided while refusing to participate in the same exchange. They benefited from your presence without recognizing the responsibility that genuine relationship requires. This realization may carry grief because you invested real care into those connections. yet it also carries liberation. Once you see the truth of those patterns, you are no longer bound by them. You understand that stepping back from relationships built on extraction is not cruelty, it is stewardship. Chosen one, protecting your peace does not mean abandoning compassion. It means recognizing that the gifts God placed within you were never meant to be consumed endlessly by those unwilling to grow. Stewardship requires discernment about where your energy flows. It invites you to invest your strength in spaces where love is returned with honor and where support moves in both directions. This new understanding allows you to release the false guilt that once accompanied your boundaries. Saying no to those who repeatedly drained you is not selfishness. It is obedience to the wisdom God is placing within your heart. By protecting the peace entrusted to you, you create space for relationships that reflect the same respect, sincerity, and spiritual alignment you carry. Chosen one, the painful clarity of this season becomes the doorway to freedom. What once drained you can no longer define your relationships, and as you step back from patterns built on extraction, you begin discovering what connection looks like when it is rooted in truth, honor, and mutual care. Chosen one, every season of awakening eventually arrives at a decisive moment. For a long time, you carried relationships out of loyalty, memory, and the sincere hope that people would eventually grow into the love they promised to give. You believed patience would produce transformation, and that remaining available would eventually teach others how to honor what they had been given. Yet the turning point in your story begins when you realize that loyalty was slowly becoming self-abandonment. What you once called love had quietly turned into emotional overextension, where you were giving pieces of yourself that God never asked you to sacrifice. This realization does not arrive suddenly. It grows through reflection, prayer, and the quiet exhaustion that comes from repeating the same patterns too many times. You begin to notice that the energy required to maintain certain relationships feels heavier than the peace those relationships bring into your life. The imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. In those moments, God gently shows you that love cannot thrive where truth is constantly ignored, and loyalty cannot remain holy when it requires you to disappear in order to maintain someone else's comfort. Chosen one, the turning point begins when you stop measuring relationships only by their history. You begin asking deeper questions about alignment. Does this connection bring peace or confusion? Does this person honor truth or avoid it? Do they reciprocate the care you offer, or do they simply return when they need something again? These questions help you recognize that many of the attachments you carried were based more on familiarity than on genuine spiritual compatibility. Instead of clinging to people because of shared past experiences, guilt, or the hope that they might change someday, you start choosing alignment. Alignment means honoring what brings peace, truth, reciprocity, and spiritual health into your life. It means recognizing that relationships should nourish your spirit rather than constantly draining it. For the first time, you begin allowing yourself to move toward what reflects the values God is cultivating within you. This shift does not require anger or bitterness. It requires clarity. When clarity enters your life, boundaries naturally begin to form. Boundaries are not walls built from resentment. They are sacred gates placed around the parts of your life that God is restoring. They determine who is allowed access to your time, your energy, and your emotional presence. Instead of explaining every decision you make, you begin trusting the discernment God is placing within your heart. Chosen one, boundaries transform the way people interact with you. Some individuals immediately recognize the change and adjust their behavior accordingly. They begin showing the respect and accountability that healthy relationships require. Yet others react very differently. The people who once benefited from your unlimited availability often struggle when those boundaries appear. They were accustomed to entering your life whenever they needed support, without considering the cost to you. When access becomes limited, those individuals may respond with confusion, criticism, or even accusations. They may claim that you have changed, become distant, or forgotten the kindness that once defined you. In reality, you have not abandoned kindness. You have simply removed the permission for your kindness to be used without responsibility. The difference between those two things is profound. Chosen one, as you withdraw from the old patterns, a revealing shift begins to unfold around you. Some people who once declared their love for you suddenly become anxious. They attempt to reopen conversations that previously revolved around their needs. They may express nostalgia for the closeness you once shared, or question why the relationship now feels different. Yet beneath those reactions lies an uncomfortable truth. Many of them are not mourning the relationship itself. They are mourning the benefits they once received from unrestricted access to your life. The panic you observe in certain individuals reveals how deeply they relied on your willingness to carry emotional weight for them. When those resources are no longer available, they must face responsibilities they previously avoided. Your boundaries remove the illusion that someone else will always absorb the consequences of their actions. For the first time, they are left standing with the realities they once transferred onto you. This moment can feel difficult because your compassionate nature still recognizes the humanity within those individuals. Yet God reminds you that growth cannot occur if patterns remain unchanged. Sometimes the most loving action you can take is stepping back and allowing others to encounter the lessons they have been avoiding. By refusing to maintain unhealthy dynamics, you create the possibility for genuine transformation, whether within them or within yourself. Chosen one. While certain connections grow distant, something remarkable begins happening within you. Each unhealthy attachment that dissolves returns a portion of your energy that had been scattered among others. You begin feeling lighter, clearer, and more centered than you have in years. The emotional exhaustion that once felt constant gradually fades. In its place emerges a calm sense of stability that reflects the restoration God has been preparing. Heaven begins returning what was slowly taken during the years when your compassion flowed without protection. Strength that once felt depleted starts to gather again within your spirit. Your mind becomes clearer because it is no longer overwhelmed by the responsibility of solving problems that never truly belonged to you. The space created by releasing unhealthy attachments becomes fertile ground for peace to grow. Chosen one, God does not leave the empty spaces unfilled. As confusion fades, discernment grows stronger. You begin recognizing the difference between sincerity and manipulation almost immediately. The emotional heaviness that once clouded your judgment is replaced by a steady inner awareness that guides your decisions. This discernment becomes one of the greatest gifts restored to you during this season. Alongside discernment comes peace. The absence of constant emotional labor allows your spirit to rest in ways it could not before. You notice how quiet your mind becomes when it is no longer occupied with anticipating someone else's needs or repairing the damage created by their choices. That quiet becomes a sanctuary where your relationship with God deepens. Chosen one, this new stability prepares you for relationships that reflect a completely different foundation. Instead of connections built on consumption, God begins aligning you with people who recognize the value of mutual investment. These individuals do not approach your life seeking a reservoir to draw from endlessly. They arrive with their own strength, their own integrity, and a willingness to contribute to the health of the relationship. In these new connections, respect flows naturally. Conversations feel balanced because both people listen and share with equal sincerity. Support moves in both directions, creating an environment where no one must sacrifice their well-being to sustain the bond. The difference between these relationships and the ones you carried before becomes unmistakable. Meanwhile, some of the people who once treated your presence as optional begin realizing what they lost. They remember the stability you brought into their lives, the clarity you offered during difficult moments, and the loyalty you maintained even when circumstances were complicated. With distance now separating you, they see that what once seemed ordinary was actually rare. Chosen one, their realization may come with regret. They may recognize that they were standing near something valuable, but lacked the maturity to honor it when it was freely given. Yet this understanding no longer determines your path. Your worth never depended on their recognition, and it does not depend on their regret now. The shift that God has initiated is not about revenge or proving anyone wrong. it is about restoration. Restoration means returning your strength to its rightful place. It means receiving relationships that honor the same sincerity you offer. It means allowing peace to define your life instead of exhaustion. Chosen one, you are now walking into a season where your value is no longer hidden beneath the noise of unhealthy dynamics. Your presence carries quiet authority because it is no longer scattered among people who did not respect it. Instead, it moves with intention, guided by the discernment God has restored within you. In this season, you do not need to chase recognition or force others to understand your growth. The stability within you speaks for itself. You move through life with the calm confidence of someone who knows their worth in God. And as you continue forward, every step becomes evidence that the energy once drained by others has been returned to you for a purpose that honors the life heaven placed in your hands. Chosen one, the conclusion of this story is not defined by resentment or regret, but by understanding. You begin to see that what once felt like a long sequence of draining relationships was never only about being misused or taken for granted. It was part of a deeper awakening that God allowed to unfold slowly within your life. Each disappointment revealed something about the nature of people, but more importantly, each experience revealed something about you. Through every moment when your generosity was stretched too far, and every situation where your kindness was mistaken for endless availability, God was teaching you lessons that could not be learned through comfort alone. The relationships that once exhausted you became mirrors, showing where compassion had been flowing without protection. The betrayals that once left you questioning yourself eventually clarified the difference between genuine love and quiet extraction. What once looked like repeated mistakes gradually formed a pattern that your spirit could no longer ignore. In that pattern, God was revealing the truth. You were never meant to live as an endless source of strength for those who refuse to grow, give, or take responsibility for their own lives. Chosen one, the people who leaned on you without honor believed your patience would remain permanent. They assumed your understanding would always outweigh your boundaries. Yet God transformed their convenience into revelation. Every situation that once confused you eventually brought clarity. The same experiences that once drained your energy became the lessons that sharpened your discernment and strengthened your sense of self-respect. As this awakening unfolded, your understanding of love itself began to change. For a long time, you believed being needed was the same as being valued. When someone depended on you for support, guidance, or emotional strength, you assumed the relationship must be meaningful. Now you see that dependence without reciprocity does not create love. It creates imbalance. Genuine love honors the presence of the other person rather than simply relying on their resources. This new clarity marks the beginning of a different season. It is not a season built on bitterness or withdrawal from the world. Instead, it is a season defined by holy awareness. You no longer confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice, and you no longer call emotional exhaustion compassion. The peace that God has restored within you has become more valuable than maintaining connections that require constant compromise of your spirit. Chosen one, the most important transformation is internal. You no longer feel the pressure to prove your worth through endless giving. Your value does not depend on how many people rely on you or how much you are willing to endure for the sake of keeping relationships intact. Your worth was placed within you by God long before anyone recognized it, and it remains there regardless of who chooses to honor it. Now you stand in a place of restoration. The energy that once flowed outward without limits has returned to strengthen your own life. Your spirit feels lighter because it is no longer carrying burdens that never belonged to you. Your mind feels clearer because you are no longer navigating the constant confusion created by people who expected access without responsibility. The story closes with you standing at the threshold of a new life. You are stronger, not because the world has become easier, but because you have become wiser. Your compassion remains, yet it is now guided by discernment. Your kindness remains, yet it is protected by boundaries that preserve the peace God has restored within you. Chosen one, the future ahead of you is no longer shaped by other people's demands. It is aligned with the purpose God placed within your spirit. Your energy is protected, your presence is honored, and the life you are stepping into reflects the truth you finally understand. You were never meant to be consumed by others' needs. You were meant to walk forward in freedom, carrying the strength, clarity, and quiet authority that come from knowing exactly who you are in God.